Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Interview with the Dracula. I am your host, Actual Dracula, and I'm honored to have as my guest tonight the writer of Parallel from Source Point Press, Jason Douglas. Welcome, Jason.
Hello. Thank you very much for having me on.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming on.
My pleasure.
Yeah, really looking forward to this. Yeah, so Parallel, I had this book recommended to me by a few of my pals here in the YouTube comic book community,
Cool.
on Instagram as well. And so I read it and I loved it. I thought it was really, I had no idea what to expect going into it. And I read it a couple times actually because...
Oh, good. I love to hear that.
Yeah, because... especially I read it also right before once you agreed to do this because the first time I read it I thought I definitely thought of some things that I wanted to ask you, but on reading it again I realized it's a 64-page book, but there's a lot to unpack in the 64 pages. It's a heavy story for sure.
So it's funny that you say that because the very first thing that pops into my head when you say that is, that's exactly what Bob Sally, my editor, said when he said, "Okay, let's cut some of the wordiness back." I am nothing if not verbose, and what I say this with a grain of salt. I say this with a little bit of a wink. But what hurt my feelings when that note came in from Bob was like, I thought I made a conscious effort to, I read comics and I know when to, leave a pause and leave a panel blank and let the art speak for itself. And I thought I had done that. And Bob was like, no, you need to cut this back. We're not writing, 1950s EC comics where through narration, and then through speech bubbles, you basically say everything twice. So I cut back a few words, but it's densely packed. And I love that you read it more than once. It's actually, just from a fanboy standpoint, my favorite comics, my favorite storylines are the ones that you want to go back to over and over again.
Absolutely.
To read again, either because you enjoyed the story so much or because there's something about it that compels you to reread it, and maybe you even think about it differently the second time through. And that's definitely something I had in mind when writing the first half and the second half of this book, for sure.
Yeah, and there's definitely things in there that I didn't catch the first time around. This is definitely a book that deserves a second or third, multiple reads for sure. Absolutely.
From a business standpoint, we call that bang for your buck, right?
That's right.
Like as a fan and a reader myself, I mean, it appeals to me in a certain way. But if we're talking about let's sell a few books, let's call it bang for your buck, and for sure, right?
Yeah. I mean, comics were something that you used to just throw away, right? You read it once and it just goes in the trash.
I mean, I've talked about this before. Obviously that's what created, that's the whole scarcity thing about, Golden Age books and even Silver Age books. But I've talked about this before where, when you're talking about a monthly book on a title that runs, several hundred issues or something from one of your big two, there's part of that that's not even necessarily designed to be reread because they have to sell next month's book, right? Yep. And indie comics aren't as, beholden to those rules as I think some of that infrastructure that's been around for 80 plus years. And so you can tell a story at least a little more readily. Not that doesn't happen in all corners of the industry, that you can tie it up and have it be something that people are compelled and you can encourage them to go back and reread it, as opposed to have to sell next month's floppy next month to keep the whole machine running.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I was going to say this is your first comic, correct? Yep. Yeah. So it's safe to say that you have a history of reading and collecting comics.
Yeah, I started a little late. I probably didn't even get started until I was 12, and then took a very typical 9-year hiatus in my mid-teens and early 20s, and then walked back into a comic shop again and have been hooked ever since, in my late 20s. Yeah, it's actually it's been a lifelong dream, but it took a bunch of kind of disparate circumstances coming together at once to get me off my butt and actually write something that I wanted to write for a long time. I had been my day job as a public school teacher and running a drama club. I had written and published a few plays, and had been writing plays and skits fairly regularly for several years. And but this was what was always in the back of my head and always what I wanted to do. It just took, like I said, a bunch of different circumstances coming together before I sat down and actually pursued that dream.
Right. Well, so what you just said is a great segue into the actual story itself. I do want to get to, kind of how Parallel came to be, but, as you were mentioning, this is sort of a lifelong dream, and, you finally got around to doing this. And that's really one of the central, if not the central, I guess, themes of this story. Actually, so for anyone who hasn't read Parallel, do you kind of want to just give a brief synopsis?
Sure, absolutely. So Parallel is, on its surface, for our general comic book readers, it's a pretty dark, twisted sci-fi tale about alternate realities, parallel worlds, and making connections between the two, and what comes of that. But underneath, it's really, really thematically a story about existential dread, anxiety, stagnation, dreams deferred, the depression that might come out of that, mental health, and second chances and what they cost. And it's about Landon, who's basically going through what people are calling these days a quarter life crisis, right? Well beyond me. Mine is a bit more of a midlife crisis about like, hey, let's get off our butts and create something. But Landon, in his early 20s, like a lot of people, had dreams and thought he had all the time in the world to pursue them. In his case, music, right? And he sets that aside because, like a lot of us do, we set those aside and we say we've got all the time in the world, and we take a job, we get in a relationship, whatever the situation might be for you, and time passes. And Landon wakes up about 5-8 years later, and where has that time gone? Where has his dream gone? Is there even a second chance out there? And he's kind of fallen into that stagnation, right? That kind of happens when you're pushing 30 and your life seems to be in a rut. I mean, Landon's definitely is. The difference between what just about all of us go through at one time or another in our life and what Landon's going through is, at his nadir, he starts to hear voices and see visions of another version of him who actually lived out those dreams and pursued his dream of music. And this other version of him is offering him a second chance that a lot of us don't get, and Landon doesn't think is possible, but it's everything he's always wanted. What makes it dark, twisted, and sci-fi is the cost might just not be worth it in the mental and physical here and now for Landon. He's got to make some pretty tough choices and some pretty scary choices to get what his heart desires.
He's going to make what you might call a leap of faith.
Yeah, there's you were saying something that is quite literal and figurative in the book for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And yeah, I mean, this is why. So actually, let me go back to. I was going to mention this before. There's an amazing foreword to this book by Casey Pierce.
Yeah, who is a superstar writer in her own right for Source Point. She is my friend. She is my hero. She is my mentor, and I'm quite honored that she wrote it. I have joked, but I'm also very serious that the foreword that Casey wrote is like worth the price of admission on this book in and of itself.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal foreword. I mean, really, it's heavy. It's perfect for this book. It kind of gives you somewhat of an idea what you're about to get into. But I was going to mention the very end of the foreword. She quotes Carl Jung, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will control your life and you will call it fate, which I think couldn't be a more perfect choice for this. Not just the quote itself, but I mean, choosing a Carl Jung quote in general, because like you said, I think that there's the things that Landon goes through, the emotions he has, these are things that I really connected with. And I think most, if not all, people have at some point to some degree in their lives. And there's a lot of themes in here that I wanted to touch on. I mean, I guess the biggest one would kind of be regret, right? I mean, that this is his dreams unfulfilled. He's, ultimately regretting, I suppose, the decisions he's made in his life because he's not living the life, that he thought he would be or dreamed he would be living.
Right. I mean, I think for most people it manifests in one of two ways, and one would be realizing that the choices you made instead of the choices to pursue a dream fairly early, and thus the regret kind of path that you're talking about. But I think that possibly even the more common one is instead of dreams abandoned, more like dreams deferred. That
right.
idea that we so often have the younger we are, that we have all the time in the world. And because the next day always comes, and because time does not slow down, and in fact, at least in my experience, and I know it's a bit of a cliche, seems to speed up the older that you get. It's truly, again, that cliche of a blink of an eye and years have gone by. And it's not even so much like you regret that you made the wrong decision. Like, you just set it aside for a moment, but that moment became a decade. And when you realize that, maybe the regret kicks in. And I think, and I've said this a few times too, but I really think it's true. And thematically, the book, it's something I really, really wanted to get across. And I think it's really important, is that you're right. I think it's pretty darn near universal, but there's this irony involved. And that's that however your anxiety or your rut or your existential dread or whatever you want to call it manifests itself, and whenever in your life it does, it's very isolating. Mm-hmm. You see Landon going through that, right? He feels very alone in this because, I mean, think about his specific situation. He's hearing voices and seeing another version of himself that's like offering him a second chance from a parallel universe. I mean, how can you not feel alone in that? Who else is going through that? And the irony is we all feel very isolated in our own heads whenever we go through our version of this. And the truth is, everybody goes through some version of it. It's like, it's quite close to universal, and yet we experience it alone. And it's kind of like at loggerheads right there, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to portray the mental health aspect of this pretty realistically. And it's always better to talk to somebody, whether it is a mental health professional or a friend or a loved one, about what you're going through, rather than trying to do it alone, no matter how isolating it feels, or in Landon's case, like how bonkers it feels, right? I mean, he thinks he's insane one panel, and the next page he knows it's absolutely real. And the fact is, as alone as you feel in those emotions, again, however it manifests for you, just about everybody you have ever known and ever will know goes through some version of it at some point in their life too. And it's better to deal with it with somebody else than to do it alone.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I couldn't agree with that statement more. And that was why, I mean, that's why I mentioned the Carl Jung quote to begin with. I mean, this is a story that absolutely speaks to, I suppose, the reality of a collective unconscious, I suppose, if not just that, well, there's certain things that make us all similar. We certainly all go through the same emotions, the same difficulties, anxieties at some point, yet we're completely isolated, because human beings have this amazing ability to separate themselves from everything and everybody else,
right?
And not realize that we're the same thing. Everybody is essentially the same. But we have we're really great at forgetting that,
Yeah.
And there was something else there I wanted to touch on, and I'm kind of all over the place. Like I said before, I had a bunch of, I thought of some really great stuff that I did not write down, so I'm just winging it here at this point. But so, would you say that oh, okay. I know what I was going to get to. This idea of parallel. What kind of gave you that idea of I'm going to use this sort of parallel reality to tell this story?
Well, there are several things. So, like the basic sci-fi idea came from brainstorming with a buddy of mine a handful of months before I started writing it, and that was us just brainstorming fun comic book ideas, because he and I for years have been talking about, oh God, what would be a good book, just kind of like BSing and sitting around and like, that would be cool. So like that kind of comic booky trope of a parallel universe and making contact between of them comes from a conversation with my friend. The idea of it being rooted in a hope and a dream that you have that you either defer or regret not pursuing, like we talked about, comes from two places. One, obviously from me, right? And I'm looking at you, Pamela, out there, right? In the chat. Time goes by and you hit that certain age and you just fight with it, don't you? And I hit that point where it was just like, it was eating away at me and time was just passing. And here was this dream that I had deferred for forever and just pushed aside. And yet that wasn't even enough to kind of get me off my butt and make me sit down one summer and start writing it. It was actually a literal situation with former students of mine. And I've been teaching long enough where I have kids that I had like in elementary school that are Landon's age now, pushing 30. And it was a specific conversation with one kid that I've got in mind who was talking about this dream that she had when she was like in college and took that job instead, right out of college, because she had bills to pay, right? And woke up 8 years later and it was like, why am I not in this city opening this dance studio, which was always the plan? Why am I still in this job that was not my passion, that is whatever, and here I am, and now it's probably too late. And that was like the final catalyst, right? And so all those things came together. My lifelong desire, my own existential crisis of dealing with time passing and not doing something, how much easier it is to not do something.
It's so easy.
The parallel universe idea that I talked about with my buddy. And then this former student who was like, yeah, this is happening to me right now at a different point in my life and a different set of circumstances. And that was the catalyst. And that's where I said, I'm not writing a play for the kids this summer. I'm going to sit down. I'm going to do this thing that I don't know if I can do it or not, but now is the time.
Yeah, I love it because you're essentially writing about the very situation that you're in, it's interesting. I love that. There was another element to the story that was really interesting to me, and that's the relationship between Landon and Claire.
Right.
Because there is, at first you're kind of like, Claire seems like kind of the bad guy in this scenario, but after reading it again, not necessarily, right? I mean, there's two sides to every story.
I am so glad that you said that because Claire comes up semi-regularly, like when I talk about the book in interviews and stuff. And I'd say somewhere between 80-90% of the time, I'm the only one who has to point out that, like, especially in the second half, I feel there's a lot of sympathy to be had for Claire.
Yeah, absolutely. I
wrote the first half kind of in a bubble on my own. That's pre-artist, that's pre-editor, that's pre-contract with SourcePoint Press. And I wrote the second half knowing Adam, knowing what I had to do and when I had to do it by. And and it was a very conscious split between the two halves of the first half. I want you to relate to and sympathize with Landon, and when he's very isolated and very self-centered going through what he's going through, he's the victim, right? Whether it's the literal victim with what happens in the first few pages, or just the metaphorical victim of, hey, I had these dreams and I got to blame somebody for them getting derailed. And Claire's a very easy target. And the way she's written in the first half of the book is, she's not doing herself any favors.
Right.
Yeah. And you very much buy into that. But like the second half of the book, you really start to see how Landon's dealing with his problems affects other people. And it's no easy road for Claire either, right?
Right.
We've got several instances in the second half of the book where I very much feel sympathy for her and empathize with her, and her having to deal with the way he's dealing / not dealing successfully with what he's going through.
Right. I mean, and even in the first half of the book, I mean, you kind of see, the argument that she makes is that, well, okay, maybe, Landon's going through something, but he's not really doing anything with what, in terms of, he wants to become a musician. Well, what's he doing about it? Not really anything.
Nothing.
Because things, you actually have to go out there and do it,
Right. So, you kind of like through some of his interactions with some tertiary characters in the second half, you see that like he made some of these choices are just straight up his choices.
Yeah, absolutely.
That not only impacted where he is mentally now, but impacted other people's lives too. Gary B in the chat wants us to talk about the kind of symbolic art, especially in the first half, where you can see Claire and Landon growing apart like over several years.
Yes,
that was Gary. That was like the first half of the book, and I wrote that very much in that bubble that I talked about, where it was just my own head, just trying to figure out how to do this. And that was one of those things that I was so excited because the idea came into my head. Like a few of those things in the first half, when I came up with the idea to use symbols of actual geometry to kind of give you that structure, right? Like the fourth grade geometry that I used to teach years and years ago, right at the beginning of the book, to kind of frame it. And then I wanted to do something kind of cool and clever. And then obviously Adam Ferris, the artist, just knocked it out of the park, where you see those repeated panels. And most of them are silent, and you can just see Claire and Landon. You can see the stagnation begin and the relationship fall apart over a couple of pages, where it's these repeated panels of the rut / routine that you see them fall into. And there's these slight changes on each page where, like, they're in bed at night and they're on the page, centimeters or whatever, but just further and further apart as time goes by. It's literal and symbolic at the same time, so that you can see where they get to, where the kind of dramatic bang happens in his life, and he's at his nadir, and the voices begin.
Yeah, I did want to get to the artwork, Adam Ferris's work, which I thought was phenomenal on this book. But I just wanted to finish up talking about the relationship of Landon and Claire. So I've been in a relationship with the same woman for 20 years. She's actually in the next room listening to this right now, so better be careful what I say. But there's definitely elements of this story that definitely hit close to home. Not so much the bed thing. Our bed is too small to be doing that. But there's certain things like where I started to, I guess, kind of see where Claire is coming from, because, I've kind of dealt with that situation in my own life, and I understand both their point of views, but I kind of felt like how, I guess, how Landon was dealing with his situation. He wanted to be a musician, but how he was going about it was even the dream itself of like you wanting to be a rock star. There's something somewhat juvenile about that, almost like of just wanting to, you want to be this big rock star, live the rock star lifestyle, but you're just like sitting at a computer looking at guitars. I mean, that's not actually going to help your situation whatsoever. And, kind of just relying on this other person, you can see where that might, there might be some strain there for sure. Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
And,
Yeah.
and,
I think that becomes more clear the further you get into the book, especially the second half, where he's the architect of just about all of this. And it's very easy for us, to blame other people or find an excuse. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're right. And I love that you're seeing that it's really, really a lot of his decisions. And if nothing else, his decisions to not make decisions, right? Like I think I've already mentioned this once. It's always easier to do nothing than something, and Landon's been living that life for a long time.
At the same time, from Landon's point of view, I mean, like my wife, for example, has always been incredibly supportive of me and everything I want to do. I wouldn't be anywhere without her, frankly. But if I showed up, if I showed up tomorrow and said, hey, honey, I got great news. I quit my job. I'm going to start making YouTube videos full time.
Yeah.
Like the fuck you are, like you got to actually, be able to, that is a possible reality. If I really worked at it, I absolutely could do that. But, you got to put the work in, right?
Right.
So yeah, I was wanted to get back to Adam Ferris. So how did you hook up with Adam Ferris? Was that through SourcePoint?
Yeah. So like my story through SourcePoint is pretty atypical for comics industry these days, especially indie comics, right? This is not a Kickstarter book. This is me handing editor-in-chief Travis McIntyre at Motor City Comic Con a few years ago a script. He actually looked at me and said, "Are you trying to pitch me a comic in 1971? Because this has like color paper clips," which I got out of my classroom. Right. And but he liked that and kind of set me up through the old school way, which is very unusual. And he had Adam kind of waiting in the wings, and Adam wanted to work with him, and here I was with a script that kind of worked with at least the way Travis saw it with Adam's art. And then the first half of the script was written, right? I had 32 pages. And then Adam started sending me, sketches and sample pages. And suddenly I could see what he did. And then I got to live out one of these fanboy geek fantasies where I got to write for a talented artist in the second half. And I knew what the second half was, but like, it's a little darker physically and kind of psychologically than maybe it originally was going to be, just basically based on Adam's art. That was just awesome to see pages come in, awesome to work with him. Some of my favorite panels that are in the book are in that second half where I was like, "Ooh, I think he can do this," and then he did. And then you mentioned right at the top about like going back and noticing things. Here's a little inside baseball for anybody who has it already and wants to go back and read it again, or anybody who's gonna buy it as a result of our talk tonight. Like Adam did some pretty interesting things. I've said this in a couple of interviews. I don't know what I'm saying when I say it, and I'm compelled to say it. Like Adam can draw ambiguity. There's a lot of ambiguity in the script. Right? Like the ending, you kind of get to make of it as you will. Yeah. There's no right or wrong answer.
That last page, for sure.
Yeah. But that dude can draw ambiguity. There's tricks that he did. I want you, like, if anybody's going to go back and read it again, check out the actual panels where our other Landon and our Landon come into physical contact with each other. And it's kind of cool because Adam does something different artistically each and every time. And that maybe means something and maybe it doesn't, but it's a really, really cool, some really, really cool techniques that he did and blew me away as the writer as those pages came in, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, this is the first time I've seen his work, but I thought it was perfectly suited to this book. I just love that that ink wash style. It was really, I mean, it's one of those things you can't put into words. Like this is really the beauty of that medium. I thought that this book really is a great example of what this medium's capable of in being able to take a meaningful story like this and really, showcase it in a powerful way.
Well, I mean, I know this is like, God, this is like a creator cliche, but I truly mean it when I say there was probably no bigger thrill than you, as the writer, seeing something in your head, and then the art comes back and it's better. Like,
Right.
I know it happens, but every time it happens, you think that can't be possible because it's supposed to be perfect in your head. And then somehow a panel would come in. And I'm like, oh my God, that is so much better than anything I envisioned. And that's just the absolute biggest thrill for sure.
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah. There was another thing I wanted to get to in terms of the story. Bear with me. What did we talk about already? We talked about
Claire. We talked about existential dread and dreams.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Oh, I guess it was. I guess I love the imagery throughout the story of the actual parallel lines, and this really speaks to the story as a whole. Kind of speaks to the idea of free will versus, a grand design or a predetermined path. And here's the thing: Landon hears this voice in his head that's himself. Well, at least he thinks. For all we know, it isn't him. But really, who's to say which Landon is the real Landon? Is that really happening?
Yeah.
And I suppose what I'm getting at is, does it really matter which it is? Which one is which?
It's funny that you bring that up because probably my favorite scene to write. I've got a very distinct memory of where I was. I was at the street fair with my wife and her friend. And I had some paper in my back pocket with some notes on it that I had taken earlier that day because I was working on the second half, and sat down on a bench on the side of the road as kind of this parade was going by, and I wrote this scene. And it's basically that scene where we're getting towards the end, and Landon's got to make his final choice about whether he's going to pursue what other Landon is offering him or not. Does he want the second chance? What he has to do in the physical here and now, which, as we mentioned before, is really not good for his mental health and maybe even much worse for his physical health, right? The sacrifice you've got to make for this second chance, is it worth it? And he's kind of got to make that final decision. And he has, in my head, when I was writing it, it's like, there's that scene in a lot of comics where the villain is doing the villain-splaining, right? And the reasons behind the villain's motivation or whatever. And they're always like these fantastical, and sometimes they're rooted in science and sometimes they're not. And I wrote this scene where other Landon basically, Landon's like, I've got to know why. Like, what do you get out of this? Why are you offering this to me? Like, why me? Mm-hmm. And other Landon gives him 3 or 4 answers, right? And one of them is the sci-fi one rooted in very questionable science, and one is a bit more of like a spiritual thing, or one is more of a selfish need, and then the last one is like, does it really matter?
Right.
Isn't this what you want? Does it matter what I say to you here, whether it makes scientific sense or metaphysical sense, or does it matter, Landon? This is what you want. So you're do this or you're not.
Right. I mean, that's the leap of faith I mentioned, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Does it matter? Well, there's only one way to find out. There really is.
Right. Right. And that's kind of the climax of the book, right? Where he either does it or he doesn't. And there's a little bit of ambiguity there, right? Some visual clues that might lead you one way or the other. But that's it right there.
Yeah, that's sorry, something going on over there. Yeah, I love this idea there. See, I had something while you were in the middle of saying that, I thought of something amazing and I just I lost it. I'm sure it'll come back to me. So actually, before, I guess what I was going to say was, how did you let's go back to how you actually got into making Parallel happen. Like, what, how did you actually go about I know you wrote this, how did you actually get it to Source Point Press? How did it end up with them publishing this book?
Yeah, so I had the first half written, and that was me, just like I said earlier. I didn't write a play that summer. I decided to do this instead, and that was a heck of an adventure because blissful ignorance, irrational confidence. Oh, if I can write a play, I can do this. It's a very different animal. And had I known what a challenge it was, it probably would have scared me off, just like I found, 100 reasons to put it off for a couple decades before that. But I wrote the first half, and I got to this point in the script where I said, okay, if I'm going to take this a step further, I kind of want to know what the possibilities of what comes next are, right, in the real world. And I did my due diligence, and I dug in online and found out that the vast majority of publishers don't want your unsolicited pitches in the first place, and those that will take unsolicited definitely don't want your script. They want art and maybe a pitch at most, and nobody wants to see my art. So that was pretty discouraging, but I didn't quite give up. And I think, again, blissful ignorance. Had I known that the way comics work, especially indie comics in today's market, is not what I had in my head, which is a very archaic version, right? Of, like I said, when I met Travis, like I was trying to pitch him a comic in 1971 or something. I literally printed out copies of cover letters and the pitch and the script and put it in old school file manila folders from my classroom with lovely colored paper clips from my desk drawer. And I took it to Motor City Comic Con with this plan of just walking up to booths where there were indie publishers and handing them a copy, thinking that that's how you did it, which is not how you do it. And Source Point's booth caught my eye because they're always gorgeous because they crush it at cons. And they're coming back this summer, by the way. Go wherever your con is, Source Point will be there. It's the best indie booth in the con. I can guarantee it. Saw a dude behind the table. He had a magnificent red beard. I was like, that looks like a dude who knows what he's doing. It just happened to be Travis McIntyre with his glorious red beard, co-founder, president, and editor-in-chief of Source Point. Walked up to him, handed him the book. He liked the cut of my jib, his words, not mine. Said, okay, you're weird. This is strange. I like your enthusiasm. I'll go read it tonight. Come back and see me tomorrow. And we're in business. I'll tell you what. I have to be careful using the word lucky. My colleagues and my friends that I've made in this industry over the last bit of time don't like you overusing that word because it undersells the effort and the hard work, not only of the artists, but of all the people who kind of toil in the blood, sweat, and tears that go into making indie comics. But I still do consider myself very, very lucky. There's a bit of kind of kismet and circumstance that came together to make this happen. And I am the beneficiary of it because now I've lived out a lifelong dream.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. And I understand exactly what you're saying about that. You got to be careful with that word lucky, but it's one of those things. It's hard to say. Like yeah, obviously you put in the work, and like I was saying, if you want to fulfill your dreams, you got to do that. But a little bit of luck never hurt either. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
So the response overall to this book, I think, has been very positive. Like I said before, several people recommended this to me, and if anyone watching has not read Parallel, I highly recommend you do so. So I'm wondering, kind of, are you working on another project right now?
Yeah, so I've got my attention as far as my comic book life, right, is kind of split in a few facets right now. I mean, number one, obviously I'm here still promoting Parallel, and it was a weird situation, this book going out into the world. As much of a dream come true as it was, I mean, it was very much derailed by COVID and the industry being affected, if not, temporarily shut down. And then, no cons and no signings, which were all lined up for when the release date came up, and are now almost a year later, kind of hopefully coming to fruition, at least at some point. So kind of working on getting, a sellout of a book that has done pretty well without cons, without signings. And we can talk about how you can get your hands on a copy here in a minute. But part of my attention is on that. Part of my attention is on, I got to show you this really quick. If you come over to my Instagram page, right, which is at J Douglas Writes, we are right now in the middle of the final Parallel giveaway, which is, this is the book, right? And I'm talking about how we can get that. But this is a sold out variant cover that sold out in under 48 hours. And this is a hand painted version by the artist Esteban.
Yeah, I love that cover.
The entire world. And I'm giving this away right now on my Instagram page. You can come over, and there's actually a pretty cool opportunity over there right now where not only can you sign up to enter to win this, there's some bonus entry opportunities. Where I direct you to go get a physical copy of the book straight from SourcePoint Press. So you're supporting indie creators, you're supporting small press publishers, and that gets you a whole mess of bonus entries. Digital copies are available too. That gets you bonus entries as well. And then also an opportunity to vote for the Ringo Awards, which actually close on Thursday, voting for Jason Douglas, me, for Best New Talent, which is, it's a great honor, but it's also, kind of a way to recognize indie comics in an industry where, the big two, rightfully or wrongfully, get most of the press and most of the attention and obviously most of the sales. I'm also working on, SourcePoint is kind of dipping their toe right now in a book about local legends, and I'm starting to write something for that this week. And then I've got my actual second comic project up and running. It just needs to be greenlit. So I've got a first script written and 4 issues plotted and story beated out, and the research has been done and the character bios are there. And it's a real personal project to me. It's dedicated to my late grandmother and to all the young ladies who have come through my classroom over the last 2 decades, because it's a post-World War II superpowered story that takes place in 1946 in a small town in Michigan. But just like Parallel, it's got a lot of underlining themes. This one's very much about race and gender and identity, and people not being comfortable in their own skin and feeling comfortable expressing who they are in a world that won't necessarily express them or accept them. And it's pretty important to me. So hopefully that gets out there for you too.
I hope so as well. I really look forward to that. You definitely, guys, if you like Parallel, nominate Jason here for the Ringo Awards. I think you're absolutely deserving of it, as is this work. I guess if anyone's got, I'm not even sure if anyone's watching this right now. If anyone's got any questions for Jason, we got a few people here. So what SourcePoint has been doing, they've been putting out a lot of great books lately.
Absolutely.
This is another great way. Like you said, this something like the Ringo Awards. It's a good way to kind of help support creators such as yourself, but also the publishers such as SourcePoint. I mean, that's really important that, these are the guys that I will say when I got really back into reading and collecting comics, one of the biggest differences I noticed was kind of the recognition that some of these independent and small press publishers were getting that they really did not have in the past, due in no small part to social media, really, for all of its pitfalls, and, it has many, the good thing about it is people being able to share these positive things with each other. And one of the things that's definitely benefited from that is, is independent comics and small press, because without fans sharing these things with each other, they would just be normally relegated to some dark corner of the con or at the back of previews. And now it's really exciting to see these books getting kind of the recognition they deserve. And if you're lucky, maybe able to, if this project is successful, then it allows you to make something else in the future, right?
Yeah. So. I mean, I've said this quite a few times, and I really truly believe it. Like, your hard-earned dollar goes so far with indie because you're literally putting clothes on people's back and food on the table.
Yeah, right? Absolutely.
You're allowing creators and editors and the people who work in the office to keep doing something they love. I mean, SourcePoint Press is as big as they've gotten, at least in the indie world. It's still a family, right? Mm-hmm. It's still run like a family. It's very supportive and very much everybody's hard work and toil to put that out there. So like, Parallels, $7 for 64 pages. And like you said at the beginning, fairly dense, and rereadable, right? So
yeah, absolutely.
That $7, and this is again not throwing shade at a Marvel or DC, but like that $7 like keeps the lights on and allows a company like SourcePoint to keep putting quality entertainment out in the world for people. Nick, when that thing comes back, I need a picture of that on Instagram so I can blast that out there. You're getting your signed copy certified. Oh my God, I have not seen one of those yet. I definitely want to see that. A couple of the I'll show you this. A couple of these exist in the world, and this blew my mind. This is a gift from the shop who ran this variant. This is the foil variant. This is the only slab I own.
Oh, that's awesome.
So there's a few slabs out there, but I do not think, Nick, that a signed one has been slabbed. I mean, that was something that probably would have happened had COVID not derailed last summer's cons and signings and stuff, right? Like a lot of that was lined up, and then it didn't happen. So you may be the first, dude. So you need to hit me up on Instagram at jdouglaswrites and show me that when that comes in. That's awesome. Let's see, Gary. Yes. Right now, I am signed up for the places that I know I'm going to be. Astronomicon. There's a few Michigan. Astronomicon, Traverse City, probably Motor City, Detroit Book Fair. I'm contemplating right now. That's actually in a few weeks. And then obviously, like we were talking about the Ringo thing, if my name's on one of those things by deadlines on Thursday, right? If my name's on one of those things, I kind of got to go to Baltimore, don't I? So I'm excited.
You registered at CBCS?
It's kind of like the last piece of that whole dream, right? I everything came true, and then the book's out in the world and all the making of process, and I got to experience all that. And the last piece kind of got just talk about dreams deferred, just 1 year late for signings.
Yeah. Are you registered at CBCS?
I have no idea. I wouldn't even know what that takes. So that's Gary. You're going to have to, I know we talk online. You're going to have to hit me up and tell me, is there something I need to do for that, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure myself.
Yeah,
So
I'm a newbie at everything. I think it gets it's for the people that I deal with, like on the editorial level and on the management level at SourcePoint. I think I get annoying every once in a while because here I am, 40 years plus myself, and I ask questions like I'm 15. Like, well, how does that work? And it's got to get annoying after a while. It's got to, because I just have because everything was first, right? So, and on one level, that was like one of the coolest things about the experience, because here I am with decades of experience as a fan, and looking at it from that side and having the bulk of my experience be from that side of it, and like going to cons and meeting the people who you respect, who created something even. And here I am on the other side of it, but I don't know how any of that works. So like I had a million questions along the way. Right.
Yeah.
To the point of like geeking out and fanboying out. And when Justin Birch like reached out to me and said, "Do you want to watch me letter a couple of your pages?" And I was like, yes, and just got to sit there and go hee hee hee. And as I watched him do that, yeah. So like everything's new. So like you ask me a question about like how something works, and most likely I don't know.
I guess one of the biggest things I walked away with from this book was, and that's a great example, is just that it's never too late, really.
Yeah.
If you still, within reason, there's always going to be limitations, I suppose, but for the most part, if there's something that you are capable of doing, I suppose physically, or it's really just a matter of just actually doing it. Like what's really stopping you other than yourself? That's there is sort of this mental block. Again, this is really what Landon has, that like what's really stopping him? It's him. It's himself.
Yeah.
It's also himself telling him that he can do that very thing.
Obviously, that's not the situation for everybody. I mean, sometimes there's circumstances out of your control.
That's right. I mean, like, like for a good example would be like, let's say, I decide I want to play in the Stanley Cup final.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go out and become an elite hockey player. Unfortunately, I'm almost 40, so that ship has kind of sailed. So I'm not talking about that so much as, but like, let's say you want to write a book. You've never wrote a book. You want to do that. Well, really, what's stopping you?
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that might be a good place to end it. I had some amazing questions I had thought of, and they're in the ether now. Who knows? But yeah, this has been great. I'd definitely like to have you back on sometime.
Sure, I'd love to.
When I remember all my incredible questions that I had, you're just gonna have to trust me here.
Well, I do want to let people know that obviously, I mean, if this piqued their interest at all, or you've heard of the book through secondary channels or whatever, you can go over to bring Jason back for hockey talk. You can bring me back for NBA talk. You're not going to get much out of me for hockey talk unless you're going to talk like mid-90s Red Wings, which I know a little bit about, but then it's a big blank spot. But I can talk NBA all day long, and that's the only sport I can talk all day long. But if people want to actually support their LCS, they can go into their LCS and order it through the Diamond Order Code FEB20 1983, which is really easy to remember because it's the year that Return of the Jedi came out. Unless you're way younger than me and have no idea what I'm talking about. You can do it that way. Or like I said, I highly recommend, if you've got Instagram, head over to my account, J Douglas Writes, and enter the giveaway for this one-of-a-kind hand-painted variant cover, which is sold out. And there's only one of these in the world. Certificate of authenticity and everything. And one way to get
you got my name down for that one.
One way to get bonus entries is to order a copy of the regular copy of a regular cover of Parallel through SourcePoint, and that gets you bonus entries, or the digital copy that gets you bonus entries, or hooking me up with one of those Ringo nominations for Jason Douglas for Best New Talent, and that'll get you bonus entries as well. So
That's
pretty
fantastic.
good deal.
Yeah, absolutely. Gary B's got a comment here about, I guess, the CBCS. There's an application you can fill out.
Yeah, so it looks like I got to do that.
That's right. Yeah, I think that's right. That's the same thing with artists. Maybe I should do that myself. If anyone, I am going to be doing some sketch covers, so we'll see.
Cool.
Yeah. So I don't know, Jason. You got anything else?
Hey, this was a lot of fun. Thank you very much for having me on, and thanks for everybody for hanging out and the good questions and the good chat. I really appreciate it. But yeah, get out there and support indie comics, support independent creators, and support small press publishers, and go buy a copy of Parallel. And I don't know, we'll sell some copies, and then I'll sell some more at the cons, and hopefully that'll be enough, and they'll bring me back, and I can keep doing this because this was a lot of fun.
Absolutely, and I hope that if anyone watching this hasn't read the book, absolutely, you got to read this book. It's amazing, because actually, like, I had this book recommended to me, and then about a month ago, I watched you do an interview with my pals, the Usual Suspects, Gary B. Right there,
Yep.
That's one of them, and that was like after that interview. I hadn't read the book, but I watched that whole interview and I was like, oh, I'm definitely reading that now, because that got me really interested. And man, I'm glad I did. And so I'm kind of hoping that, the same thing happens here. Hopefully someone sees this and decides, well, yeah, that sounds really good. And they check it out. Definitely. So that's kind of the goal here, spread the good word.
I love it.
All right. So Jason, thank you very much. It was a pleasure having you on. I'd love to have you back again sometime. If even if you want to talk about, the next book that you're working on, I'd love to hear about
absolutely. That sounds excellent. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I truly enjoyed myself. Honor was all mine.
All right, man. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much.
Have a good night.
You
See
too.
you next time.